I love the way she whispered. Did you hear that?
Yeah, me too. I know, and those fingers go right with the whisper.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Welcome, friends. Welcome to the Jersey Alchemist. I'm your host, Dr. John Gerard Gallucci.
Joined by Philip D'Angelo.
And today we're going to just get into all sorts of topics that surely will tweak your interest.
Absolutely. Mostly with the spiritual side,
Right.
John, right? I believe
Right.
it. Because you know what's going on in the world today. I mean, I think the spiritual side should be out there a little bit.
Oh, no doubt. And I just want to emphasize that the name of the podcast is going to be The Jersey Alchemist. And what we aim to do here is to chit chat about all sorts of things. We'll pick a topic for daily discussion. And if we can't come up with the topic, we'll go to the Wheel of Destiny, which is it's basically a boardwalk wheel. It is the Jersey Alchemist, so that fits in with the Jersey
Shore.
Shore,
Absolutely.
theme. And then, but after we discuss and expose the topics, and we have about 100 different topics that we'll eventually get to, and we can add. But after that, in keeping with being alchemists, we are going to hopefully nail how Archangel Michael would approach the topics that beguile humanity. These are all of the topics of the day, ranging from modern animal farming, pesticides, healthcare, the banking system, war, all sorts of things like that.
All intertwined with a spiritual side and then a not so spiritual side. You know, and
Right.
unfortunately, in my
Right.
opinion, I don't think the spiritual side is really talked about or even mentioned anywhere during the course of events.
Don't you think that's because the powers that be are trying to crush humanity's sense of their own spirituality?
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that spirituality is from within, correct?
Yeah,
So
is.
it's something that who can control it? I mean, big government can't control it. Does the church control it?
They try.
They try.
Right. But if think of it this way, right? And I agree totally with you that everyone's spirituality is on an individual basis, and we're all at our own points in evolution along our spiritual path. But if you think of it this way, for many, 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 many decades, television has been known as the opium of the masses, and television programming, we all know, is not so far from that concept of programming. So we have been, as far as I'm concerned, we've been brainwashed by television network programming from the moment it began. And so I in that sense, Phil, I believe that even though spirituality comes from within, if you have a very, very capable, powerful tool like television that's in every home, at least in the West, we're being told how to think, what to think, and when to think it.
Interesting. So if we have the media, if we have big government, and even big religions, and they're pushing it out there, how does a person become spiritual? How does somebody get that spiritual message if all these gigantic, very wealthy powers are not pushing a spirituality?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I would say, I think having a true sense of your own spirituality is almost a state of grace, and it's been long said that grace is a gift. You can't dial up grace. You can't turn it on a TV station. You can't obtain grace from watching a televangelist while they're hawking you for money because they want a jet. Ooh, no. Modern healthcare isn't going to bestow grace upon you. Your local church, synagogue, or temple is not going to bestow grace upon you. So going back to what you said, it is from within. And I think that we suffer the slings and arrows of this existence. And at one point, for most of us, in this skin, in this lifetime, our inner grace will break through. And that's actually what I believe.
I find that most people who are spiritual seem to be people that have gone through a struggle, that have gone through something in their life, and they actually almost had nowhere to turn but to their spiritual self inside, right. And that to pray to God or to whatever God that may be.
Right.
I mean, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that people that have been through a struggle they get it. They know that they pulled out of it thanks to some help.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever heard the concept that, well, it takes tons of pressure to change a lump of coal into a diamond, right?
True.
And well, that is true, right?
Absolutely.
But I think what we are striving to do here with the Jersey Alchemist is to take the lead that's in our life, the garbage that's in our life, the crap that's in our life, and change it to diamonds and gold, bringing about people's individual grace and their own brand of evolution. How is that done? Well, another interesting concept is, unfortunately, in this particular paradigm, trauma is usually something that precedes profound growth and grace.
Absolutely, I agree 100%.
Right.
Maybe is there any way to get like young children? Well, it really starts in the family, the household as well, right? If you grew up in a religious family, I know, going to church every Sunday.
Well, we were religious in that, yeah. I mean, it was kind of mandated that it was Sunday, you were going to get dressed
and go to church,
and you were going to go to church. And did we like it? No. I know that for my brother and sister and I, our favorite part of the Catholic Mass was at the end when the priest said, "The Mass is ended. Now go in peace." Yeah. And we would just run. You had all the kids clomping down all the way down the side aisles to the front of the church and out, because then it was playtime, or more likely for us it was the television and to watch Abbott and Costello, whatever Abbott and Costello movie was on at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning.
Interesting. So if church is not the way, so if big religion's not the way, just like big government, I mean, how's that message going to get across? I mean, all right, people that go through struggles, they're going to get it. How do you find like-minded people that are spiritual? Do they just gravitate to each other? I mean,
well, I think you'll find that people that are cohesive, meaning people that do tend to stick together, will usher their children, their young, into as much of a spiritual existence as could possibly be had. What do I mean by that? Well, there's an ancient Hebrew tradition that you really need to mold your children within the first 5 or 6 years of their lives, and then pretty much anything that you set into their hearts and their minds is what will follow them for the rest of their lives. Now, let's talk about expectations and good old-fashioned family spiritual brainwashing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I think the ancients knew it was true, that worked, as opposed to a contemporary politician who wrote a book called It Takes a Village. That concept of it takes a village to raise a child turns my stomach. Hillary Clinton wrote that book, or some ghostwriter with her, and it hit the shelves pretty expediently when she was making her push on the national scene. Why do I have a problem with it takes a village to raise a child? Who's the village? Is it the local political system? that goes to the state political system, that goes to the national political system. You think you're going to raise my child? Guess again, you're not.
Interesting. Well, being spiritual, when did spirituality come into your life?
Wow. Let me do my best to define spirituality, at least as I understand it. Spirituality, to me, means that you yield simply to a higher unseen power than what's in front of your nose. So that power that is unseen supersedes your government. It supersedes the globalist corporations. And by the way, make no mistake about it, your governments are merely puppets for the globalist corporations, because the governments do not control the corporations. It's just the other way around. The global corporatists, the present day robber barons, if you will, control the politicians all the way up to presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens. So to be spiritual, to me, means to understand with every cell in your body and indelibly that there's a greater, higher power than you or the people that are around you. And I think that I knew that ever since I was a small child. I talk a lot about that in the first chapter of the book that I wrote called My Life with God. And yes, I'm going to hold it up because everybody should read My Life with God. There are people who told me, you know what, the choice of title of that book is surely going to kill the sales of the book. Well, guess what? I agree with them. In retrospect, that it probably did, but I wouldn't change a thing, because this book has yet to be out there, advertised, realized. It has yet to be realized. The message in this book is basically take your life and remember who you are, a child of the Creator. And when you love God above all others and then love your neighbors as yourself, regardless of what position you hold in society, you change the world overnight. The book is 38 chapters. Each one is a different individual story. Most of them are pediatric surgically related, because for decades I was an award-winning pediatric and neonatal general and thoracic surgeon here in New Jersey. So a lot of the stories come right out of my own personal experience. Just to add a bit more understanding on the fact that these stories really happened just the way you'll read them, many of them at the end of the chapter will be followed by a writing or an excerpt written by either the patient or the patient's parents. So I would say don't miss it. It's full of lessons that will stay with you in a very, very positive way for the rest of your lives. So, My Life with God.
Well, it's a great book, a great read too, especially the fact that it's all true. I mean, the stories in there are amazing, and a very spiritual book, John. I mean, it says God on the title, and you back it up with every chapter. You know, you talk about having that higher being, and how God guided you through those surgeries.
Yeah.
How
Yeah, big time.
how did the spirit, like, how did you feel doing those surgeries? I mean,
Okay,
was
that's
was the spirituality there, or did you tuck it away, or did you bring it out front?
I have a tendency to, without the Holy Spirit working through me, I have a tendency to feel very bare. I feel naked. I feel incomplete. I feel incapable. And that sounds like it would be a real problem for somebody who went through undergrad school, 6 years of undergrad, dental school, before medical school, then 6 years of surgical training in general surgery, then another 2 on top of that in pediatric surgery. How could you have this inner sense of kind of like I'm not good enough, but that inner sense that always made things more difficult for me put me squarely in line with yielding to the Holy Spirit. And there's a segment or two in this book where I describe what it means to be moving and working in the Spirit. And it happened to me in athletics, in high school and college. And certainly I used this and I worked in the Spirit when performing surgeries that I thought, that I knew were life threatening. And it was something that I relied on. I leaned on it. Was it a crutch? Absolutely, it was a crutch. It's the ultimate crutch. So,
Explain that, worked in the Spirit.
wow, I love this. When you speak in the Spirit or when you work in the Spirit, everything that you are in this third dimension, it's your ego, it's your mind-body connection, has to yield to the Holy Spirit and has to get out of the way. And if you and if you don't get out of the way, then it's John Gallucci trying to throw a high school discus further than the next guy. Throwing or performing athletically in the Spirit, literally for me and for many others, it goes like this. You begin your task, and then something mystical comes over you. Something supernatural happens to you. And I promise you, you go, for all practical purposes, completely out of your consciousness. You become unconscious to who you are, what you are, where you are. You can't feel your body. It's like somebody just took your brain, your consciousness, and went, here, do me a favor, step aside. And they just put it on a shelf, and the Spirit literally moves into you, and everything that you do, you're channeling the Holy Spirit. Even hitting a home run in baseball, or throwing a touchdown pass, or running back a kickoff, or throwing a discus, or a javelin, or a ping pong match, or a hole-in-one in golf. It's almost unthinkable that anybody without a supernatural sense could drive a golf ball from the tees and put the ball in the cup with one shot. And that's how I see it. So when I was faced with what I would call very intimidating surgical prospects, where my quote to the director in the NICU was that I think the baby's got about a 10% chance of surviving the operation. And then if the baby survives the operation, then there's just a whole world of pitfalls that are waiting, like bacterial sepsis, fungal sepsis, multi-system organ failure, all of that. If you stop to think about how difficult all of that can be to overcome, you probably quit before you begin. And so moving and working in the Spirit, and I would call it the Holy Spirit, make no mistake about it, there are too many people on this planet that move and work by the Spirit, but it is not the Holy Spirit. It's a different spirit. So that's my answer about what it means to work or move in the Holy Spirit. You have to silently, with your heart, get out of the way, ask for help, and say, Holy Spirit, please move in, take the wheel, and
Well,
and that's how I got through for decades and decades and decades. And I'm sure that I've saved kids that had no business being saved, and I attribute it to the guidance and the handiwork of the Holy Spirit working through me.
wow. Now talk about spirituality. That's amazing. Now, how about the kids that were fortunate enough to cross paths with you? I mean, just think of the journey that those parents and those kids were that somehow they didn't end up. I mean, listen, they might have been successful somewhere else, another hospital, another doctor. We don't know that, but I mean, your record is outstanding. I mean, to put them on a course with you, I mean, it's pretty. There has to be some other force that's putting you
Yeah.
two together, especially in the most dire situations. Were there any cases where they went to other places and didn't like what they heard? Maybe.
Well, I think that is true. I mean, that's happened. That's happened. And look, I'd be foolish to think that there were people that maybe came to me and didn't like what they heard from me, and maybe they went and they left and went somewhere else, and God
Right.
bless them. And everything happens for a reason. Now that expression's been kind of beaten to death, but let's keep beating it. Let's keep using it, because I am all in on that. Everything in this life happens for a reason. And it's interesting. There's a segment in my book, I think it might be the introduction, where I say the book, my entire life has been against all odds. And the book that I wrote, instead of being titled My Life with God, could easily have been titled Against All Odds.
Mm.
And why do I say that? Because I have done things that I had no business doing, like none. And so after I explained that, somewhere in the introduction or maybe the discussion later on toward the end of the book, I say, look, this book is not about John Gerard Gallucci. The book is about the reader. And that's the whole point. This is not a book that says, yay, John Gerard Gallucci, you saved 12,000 kids. You did this, you did that. You broke a record in athletics. It's not about me. It's all about you, the viewer, the reader. This is how you get yourself out of the doldrums of the life that you think is going nowhere. You have to get out of the way, and you have to knowingly and willingly ask the Holy Spirit to move into your life. And I promise you, it will happen.
You have to accept that realm of thinking. You have to accept spirituality.
Right.
I'm a big believer in motivation. And, you could talk to somebody about motivating them, use these, Winston Churchill, never, never, never give up. If you believe it, if you accept that motivation, let's run through a wall. But if you don't accept it and you're closed-minded, it goes nowhere.
Right.
No,
yeah.
So the same thing with spirituality. If somebody's closed-minded, John, they don't have a shot.
Yeah.
But if they open up, like you said, and you're right, your book it's not really about you. You're like a vessel
That's
for God, the Holy Spirit, to show people what can be accomplished, what can be done.
Right. And you just reminded me, that there are those who are not ready, and to use biblical terms. And I'm not a pastor or a preacher. I can't, off the top of my head, quote in biblical chapter and verse. I wish I could. Maybe one day I can. Time's running out. But there are people who are just not ready to see what they need to see. And biblically, they'd have to overcome the recalcitrance within them so that the scales fall off their eyes, and then they can see the light of day. And I think that metaphorically, Jesus, apparently he healed the sick, and he made the blind see again. But I think at least there were a few times that maybe metaphorically he was changing the hearts and minds of people so that they could see metaphorically what they couldn't see before their interaction. So some people are just not ready. Look, we're all in this race, and we're not racing against each other. I'm not racing against Phil, and I'm not racing against Xenon, who's behind the camera. I'm racing kind of with myself, because we're all eternal beings, and everybody's at their own particular stage or level of spiritual ascension and growth. And, this could lead us to a talk about where we are energetically with our consciousness, and then we can get into talking about the 7 major chakras, what you see behind us on the wall back there. But it all ties together.
Absolutely. Like you're a vessel. I also believe another vessel. Tell me what you think about this. Somebody like Tim Tebow. Okay, a
Right.
big believer in God.
Yeah.
John 3:16.
Yeah.
And he's kind of ostracized. He's polarizing. I mean, nowadays everybody in the NFL takes a knee right when they get to the end zone. He did it in college, and he put the 3:16 under his eyes, and
Right.
people were a little put off by that.
Right. But he took a knee to the Lord.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And the people contemporarily now that are taking a knee are taking a knee for something completely different.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. That whole issue with Tim Tebow reminds me that when Jesus was being tempted by Satan in his 40 days in the wilderness, so to speak, there were all, very memorable takeaway moments. And the one that I just love because it has everything to do with what's happening around us today was Satan was tempting Jesus with this and with that. And he said, he took him up onto a mountain so that he had a vista of, I guess, the world below. And he said, worship me, and all of this will be yours.
True.
Does anybody have any idea how to make that germane to contemporary issues? Do you think by being reverent to the Holy Spirit, to the living God, that's going to get you a Grammy? That's going to make you win an Oscar? No, I would say just the opposite. Just the opposite. Just the way the title of my book, My Life with God, absolutely held up the sales of my book, and that's okay because this has not yet begun to run yet. And when it does, look out, billions of people will hear the message of this book.
What I like about that Tim Tebow story is that's the only path. I'm not a big Bible person. I do read it occasionally. But John 3:16, and God sent his only son. So the message, like you get your message out, there was a playoff game with the Denver Broncos. He was the quarterback, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And a lot of people poo-pooed this, but I don't know the exact stats. He threw for 316 yards.
Oh, yeah.
His average catch from his receivers was 31.6, and I believe the average rush, like I don't know exactly, was 3.16 yards or something.
That's crazy.
That doesn't happen by accident.
Right. That doesn't happen by chance. There's no way.
And to me, it was amazing how some people just blew that off, and I was like, that is amazing.
Of course they would blow it off, because if you don't have the eyes to see or the ears to hear, you're deaf, dumb, and blind. Absolutely. You are deaf, dumb, and blind, and you are never going to understand what just happened in your face. It's amazing. So you're right, and I kind of lost my train of thought, and I thank you for jumping in. But, if you accept the Holy Spirit and you take up the cross, and I know this may sound a little strange to the hardcore Christians out there that may or may not be watching
Hey, it's
this.
2022. Everything sounds strange.
Everything sounds strange.
Put it
right?
out there.
But if you want to take up the cross, if you want to live by the Holy Spirit, remember where you are, right? Remember who you are and remember where you are. You are in the world, but you're not of the world. And the world doesn't know you because the world did not know him, period. So follow the dark side and all of this will be yours. How many times have you seen on a YouTube video some mega superstar in the music industry refer to Lucifer? All too often. I mean, I'm going to say it. There's a video where Lady Gaga, whether she's kidding around or not, says, I swear to Lucifer. And she thought she was being real cute. But a lot of us see right through her. Is she talented? My God, she's talented. Is Madonna talented? wow, is she talented. All of those people out there that are so talented, do you think that they go home and open their Bibles and give thanks and praise to the Lord? No, they don't. No, they don't. They got another gig going on because they worship the dark side. And now all of the bells and whistles and baubles and accoutrements and pleasures of this world now belong to them. But that's only a time and dated gig.
You know, there's another battle going on, like with what you just brought up. You know, people in entertainment and sports that on the dark side, they put their message out there. The media pumps their message out there, and then there's gentlemen or people like Tim Tebow, yourself, put it out there, and it doesn't seem to get as much recognition, or
Right.
like the word doesn't spread.
And it won't.
And it won't.
And it won't. Just on that whole notion of the world doesn't know you because it doesn't know him. Him would be the Christ.
Absolutely.
Right.
Do you believe that the people, your patients, their families, in a way, that was your way to spread the word? I mean, did your spirituality come up in any conversations with them before, during, or after?
It did.
Okay.
It did. But I had the ability to kind of know
Mm,
who would be accepting,
sure.
who would just eat it up, and there are others who I knew intuitively that if I started down that road or up that road, they were not going to follow, and quite frankly, they'd probably report me to the president of the hospital. So I knew who they were, and I just backed off and played the role of surgeon.
Wow, it's amazing how the difference, the scale is so weighted on one side. You know, for the word of like you said, the dark side, and then the word of the light side to get through. You know, and I just think that once you have that spirit in you, I find spiritual people are the most giving people, and they kind of all somehow meet up, or you're always going to find somebody who's almost as giving as you.
Right.
And spirituality, it, to me, John, it changes that. Either you were giving always, or you become a giver.
Yeah.
And then once you become a giver, it's off to the races. That
Right.
spreads like crazy.
Yeah. No, it does.
It's
You're
like
right.
something simple, like holding the door open for somebody. Which nowadays in 2022, nobody's holding the door over somebody, right? But if you open the door for somebody, guess what? That person, oh, okay, and they're going to look behind them, and they're going to hold it open for somebody.
Right.
Very simplistic,
Yeah.
but you know, it doesn't take much.
It is very simplistic, and I would say this. I think we were talking, and we touched upon this earlier today, before we started filming, that spiritual growth and spiritual connection is usually, not all the time, but is usually preceded by trauma. And unfortunately, the worse the trauma, the greater the spiritual experience. So, think back to 9/11. People didn't give a hoot about each other, certainly not in New York City. And then buildings come down, planes fly into this building. We're all in lockdown, and it was bedlam and calamity. And for months after 9/11, the events of 9/11, people were opening doors for each other. People no longer saw the differences between them. They were only aware of the common denominators. Hey, this person's in the elevator with me and they're breathing the same air. Didn't matter what color they were, what race they were, what religion they were, what position they held, whether they were wealthy or poor. Everybody was in it together because of the trauma that 9/11 brought about. I would say to you, the dark side pulled off 9/11, but it backfired in their face. Sure, in the aftermath of 9/11, we were dealt crappy legislation like the Patriot Act, which is now being used against everybody. But I would say that God works in mysterious ways, and 9/11 ultimately, in the end, is going to work against the dark side because people will never forget 9/11. And as the events of the day 2022 unfold, all of a sudden they're going to realize what happened in Wuhan, what happened in the Ukraine, what happened in New York City and Pennsylvania on 9/11, and then they're going to realize it's them against us and that we're children of God, and quite frankly, they aren't.
Have you ever been to the 9/11 memorial?
Actually, no.
I've been there one time on a motorcycle run. It was pretty impressive, and it is so amazing because basically it's the scene of a mass murder.
Oh, absolutely.
You want
that's
to talk
what it
about
is.
the differentials, and people are posing for selfies
Yeah.
by the fountain, and I thought, like, wow, this is. I mean, it is enlightening, and it's a joyous. I mean, but it's so weird the attack on each, happy, sad, murderous. I'm posing for a selfie. It was weird. The dynamic there was really strange.
I bet.
I felt
yeah.
very uneasy there. Like wasn't walking around smiling at all.
Right. Well, that's how I felt in Washington D.C. at the Vietnam Memorial, and that was years ago that I was there. But to me, the whole thing was very, very somber.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a morbid event happened.
Oh yeah.
Life changing, innocent
Big
people.
Big time.
Innocent people. But like you said earlier, out of the trauma, out of the darkness, there always seems to come light. I mean, but why does it take so long for that to happen? Why does something bad have to happen to gather a family together? To gather a country together? I mean, why isn't it just out there?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think if we had a canned, reliable answer for that, it'd be sold on every street corner.
Yeah. Could it be that here in the United States, maybe it's not like that in Europe and other countries that don't have as much money? Could it be that we have so much money, we have everything we need,
Well,
and we take it for granted?
That certainly could be. I mean, the United States has been blessed on many levels. But it's interesting. We were blessed by having two oceans as east and west borders, and then north and south were countries that we never feared that would invade us. And so that gave us a level of comfort, except now, because we're so isolated, I say we're sitting ducks for the dark side.
Yeah, I think, but there seems to be a movement. I mean, with all the trials and tribulations going on in our country today, it just seems like there's a movement starting. And people are talking about God, and people are talking about spirituality more than ever.
Right.
I mean, and it needs to be brought up to keep everybody focused and to keep that movement going. Listen, life is energy,
Right.
and momentum.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah,
you don't
for
have
sure.
that momentum going, everything stops.
Well, if it's true, and I think it is, that profound spirituality and a profound connection to the Creator is a natural consequence of trauma. And I think the trauma is proportional to the connection that ensues. It pretty much speaks of what's going to happen right now with the world, because we have the dark side. All you have to do is look up Klaus Schwab. Klaus is spelled with a K. He is a Rothschild, and there are those who are going to groan and roll your eyes and call me a conspiracy theorist. You're idiots. Wake up. The fourth industrial revolution is being created as we speak. The New World Order is being laid out for many, 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 many years, and I've been railing against that on social media for probably about 12 years. So where does he see this all going? I'll tell you where. How does this sound to you? You will own nothing, and you will be happy. Well, that might be true in heaven, but this ain't heaven, people. And Klaus Schwab ain't God. He's not my God. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Do you think, John, that the modern day church, maybe synagogue, in all places where religion is practiced, do you think that they're not doing a service to the people? Like they're so stuck in their archaic ways that it just, they can't connect with people on a modern level. I mean, what our parents and grandparents went through and relied on the church for, we don't rely on that anymore,
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's why spirituality is kind of becoming an individual thing.
Right. Um, I think there's a struggle within each major world religion.
Okay.
There are factions and fractions, and I can speak probably most clearly about the Roman Catholic Church. And please make a distinction in your minds between the Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Church, because the straight shot doctrine from St. Peter and Paul, from the days of Jesus, the days that they walked the earth, that doctrine from the day that the Holy Spirit fell upon the apostles in the upper room, which was the beginning of the infant church, their straight doctrine has gone unfettered all the way up through the years into Orthodox Christianity. That would be Greek Orthodoxy, Russian, Syrian, any Eastern Orthodox church considers themselves the Catholic Church. I think it was the year 1052 or 1054 where the Catholic Church had a schism, a break, a fork, if you will, and I believe it was the Bishop of Rome was elected the quote Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, and they left Constantinople, which is today Istanbul, and went off in a different direction. And I can tell you that the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church has been compromised massively over the years, massively, and I think we all know that. So the straight shot, the original Catholic Church is Eastern Orthodoxy. Don't be fooled, that's the truth. The Roman Catholic Church is an offshoot, and it has been infiltrated by the dark side.
Mm. So, John, if you were going to give a spiritual message for people out there today, what would you tell people? Like about accepting spirituality, promoting sharing spirituality to people.
Well, I think it's difficult for the average person, especially the average young person, you know, teens all the way up through and into maybe the mid 40s. I think that humanity's pressures, societal pressures are massive upon them. The people that are in their 50s and 60s, like us and older, have seen so much and have been through so much that we have a completely different perspective. And quite frankly, we live in a different world than our children do. So I think society intentionally makes it extremely difficult for young people to have a true strength, faith, and a spiritual nature, because they're being told, and it's being reinforced every single day, that the only thing that matters to you is money, power, position, sex, clothing, cars. I could remember a popular kids show, preteen show. Don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of the show, but I'm going to say it. It was called iCarly. My kids used to watch that. And so, every once in a while I'd sit down and kind of watch. And I realized that there wasn't a single adult in the show, and that a bunch of preteens that were all very good looking and all made up and dolled up were living in a drop dead gorgeous high-end, high-def apartment where the elevator doors opened up into the apartment. And there was one kid who used to walk around with a large video camera on his shoulder, taping everybody. For what? And the kids thought this is what normal is. This is what life should be. There was no mom, there was no dad, there was no grandma or grandpa, there was no aunt to keep an eye on you. It was all a bunch of preteens in $1 million apartment with some other teen filming them with a video camera. What in God's name was that all about? So it's very difficult. Every time you turn on the television, what's getting pumped into your brain? Who won an Oscar? Who won a Tony, an Emmy, a Grammy, the Super Bowl, the World Series, the Stanley Cup? It's one thing after the next. And then if they're not co-opting your brains and your hearts and minds with that, then of course, even more than that, they're smothering kids, everyone, in fear, utter fear. Right, because a fear-based society keeps society controlled.
Well said. You know, you mentioned a couple of family members, aunt, mother, and father. I feel there's definitely an attack on the nucleus of the family.
Sure.
You know, divorce is rampant in our society. We have to go back to family. I'm a big believer in that. You know, not only spirituality, but just the actual physical being of a family. You know, where I grew up, way back in the 70s, well, 60s and 70s, there was one divorced family in the neighborhood, and my mother told me, "Don't go near that house."
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
how different it was, you know.
Right,
And now,
right, yeah, no, right.
I think if there's a married couple that's still together, they're like,
Right.
what's up with them?
Right.
Why are they still together? So I think that family nucleus has to make a comeback.
Right.
But
Yeah.
mom's working,
Yeah.
dad's working.
Right. Well, I mean, it was a video on YouTube I saw years ago, and the gentleman who was being filmed was a Hollywood producer and director. His name was Aaron Russo. He's deceased. He passed away of cancer maybe about 10 years ago. And he was talking about how he had become friends with some of the Rockefellers. He didn't seek them, they sought him, because the elite that play us all, that dangle the world, are constantly looking for people that they would consider to be influencers. Influencers. So Aaron Russo, I think he won a couple of awards with his Hollywood films and whatnot. And so the Rockefellers approached him, and they wanted him to be in the political race. They wanted him to run for, I think, governor of Nevada, either that or Arizona. I think it was Nevada. And I don't know if he ran. He didn't win, but I think he considered it. The bottom line is that in his discussions with them, and you can look at this video on YouTube, take it from him, not me. They were going to teach him the way of the world. And they said, you know what? Women's liberation, we found it. He says, who's we? The Rockefeller Foundation. We incepted it and we funded it. He says, do you know why? He says, because with the advent of the industrial era, that supplanted the agricultural era, and I think that was around 1760, something like that, right? Early back then. The fathers were no longer in the household every day. They had to travel to a city to go to work for the man, because now money became everything. It was no longer pulling up to the general store to buy this or that so that you can run your household and run your family farm. No, now it was, I had to have money in the bank to pay for food. So that took the father, by distraction, by necessary distraction, out of the sphere of influence of the young kids. But it wasn't until many, many years later that they figured out how to also take the mothers out of the sphere of influence for the kids. So once women hit the workplace, and I'm not saying that women shouldn't be in the workplace. I have 3 kids, and two of them are very high functioning females.
Of course.
But that's not the point. The point is, why did they do this? They did this to co-opt the hearts and minds of the kids, because way back then they were incepting and funding the fact that children should not be raised and taught by their parents. They had to be raised and taught by the state. Wow. Where do we see a great example of that? Not in ancient times, no. We see that in the era right around the Bolshevik Revolution, which was a secular movement in Russia that saw the Tsar and his family brutally murdered by the Bolsheviks. And after the Bolsheviks ushered in communism, the communists in Russia, which turned into the Soviet Union, went around destroying every church that they could find, removing the influence of the Holy Spirit, at least ostensibly, from the hearts and minds of the kids. French Revolution wasn't much different. I got news for you. We're in the same throes now that happened back in 1917. The same exact thing, the same dark agenda to co-opt the hearts and minds of the families, to destroy the nuclear family. If you destroy the very basic building block of a society, then you own the society.
I think that's a great topic for a future podcast. The family, past, present, and future. I mean, I think we could talk for hours about that. About
I think
that.
we can talk for hours about anything.
Yeah, that's for sure. And that we definitely have to look into that. That'd be very interesting because we all come from families and we all have experiences with families, and we have experience with people. You know how some children grew up without the family structure, and how children that grew up with the family structure, and the differences between. You know,
Right.
so that's a great future episode.
Right. And another great topic we'll get into is how many people have lived in a house with multiple families that were relatives. I had the blessing of having my mother's mother live with us for many years, and they were some of the best days and best memories of my entire life. Of course, my father's generation, they all lived in the same building.
Yeah, that's definitely part of that future episode. I
Right.
mean, that's all entwined and tangled together. We're definitely going to do that. Are we going to talk about a topic of the day, or
Well, I think we kind of
exceeded our limit?
Exceeded the limit
Excellent.
for today.
Okay.
And certainly next time we're going to do that. We're going to chit chat like this and maybe abbreviate it a bit, and then go to a topic of the day. We literally are going to spin a wheel so that the topic is brought to us by literally the spin of the wheel. All right?
Absolutely. I'm all
Dynamite
in.
Phil,
Thank you.
thank you.
Great job.
See you again soon.